Part 1. The coldest morning in living memory that winter. Even the sun seemed afraid to show its face. The sky over the village was washed out, the color of frozen ash locked in a lifeless gray. The air didn't just bite, it cracked. At 7-1C, a single breath burned your lungs like fire. People here were used to cold, but this was different. This was the kind of cold that chased you inside, slipped under your furs, and froze the tea on the table before you could drink it. Inside a small log cabin, its walls stitched together with time and smoke, a woman named Ayana woke to a pain she knew well. Contractions. Her husband, Saka, lay beside her, but just from the rhythm of her breathing, he knew the time had come. Saka rolled out of bed, pulling on a thick reindeer hide robe. He stoked the small iron stove, the soft crackle of wood the only comfort against the icy silence. But he knew the truth. Today, even fire would struggle to win. Ayana gripped her belly and exhaled through clenched teeth. Saka tried to smile at her, but in his eyes was a shadow of fear. The village clinic was nearly an hour away on foot. A death sentence in this weather, even if he could make it. There was no guarantee the nurse would be there. Out here, deep in Yakutia on the frozen banks of the Lena River, survival meant relying on yourself and your neighbors. He stepped outside. The cold slammed into him like a wall. His eyelashes froze together in seconds. He trudged through narrow, hard-packed snow paths between houses buried to their roofs. The sled dogs didn't bark. They stayed curled in tight balls, conserving heat. Even they knew this was no day to waste energy. The first door he pounded on was his sister's. Within a minute she stood there, wrapped in furs, carrying a steaming pot of water and a sack of reindeer hides. Word spread fast in a place like this. A birth wasn't just a family event. It belonged to the whole village. Soon, 3 women and 2 men had gathered in Ayana's cabin. The women began preparing the space. The men would go fetch Daria, the village midwife. Daria had been delivering babies for over 40 years. She'd seen storms, blizzards, and winters so cold that trees split in half with loud cracks. If anyone could bring a child safely into this frozen world, it was her. The women worked quickly. They laid thick hides near the stove, set a bucket of water close to the heat, and placed flat river stones in the fire so they could be slipped under the bedding to warm the floor. It looked like the preparation for some ancient ritual. Every tool in its place. Clean cloths, boiling water, folded furs, hot stones. Ayana sat against the wall, staring at the frost flowers blooming across the window pane. She tried not to think about the cold beyond those thin log walls. All she could focus on was breathing, steady and slow. The door burst open. A cloud of steam rolled in, and behind it, Daria. She was a small, sturdy woman in a wolf fur coat, her face red from the wind, her eyes sharp as flint. She glanced at Ayana once, then began giving orders in a voice that could cut through any storm. Keep the heat steady, stones here, water close to the stove, cloths ready. Everyone moved at once, no hesitation. The cabin felt like a ship in the middle of a gale, each person with a role, each movement purposeful. But outside, the cold remained, pressing against the walls, creeping in through the floorboards, freezing every breath into crystals that clung to their hair. Daria knelt beside Ayana and rested a warm, calloused hand on her shoulder. "It will be fine," she said. "Today, we'll beat the frost." And for that moment, everyone in the room believed it. Even at -71°C, even in the coldest place on Earth. Part 2. Fire versus frost. Stove rattled and hissed, swallowing every scrap of wood the men fed it. In weather like this, even the flames worked harder, clinging to life against an enemy you couldn't see but could feel in your bones. The logs popped like musket fire, and every so often, a shard of ice cracked off the roof and thudded onto the snow outside. Ayana's contractions grew stronger. She gripped the edge of the reindeer hide laid beneath her, the fur damp under her hands. The smell of smoke and boiling water filled the room, an ancient, timeless scent of survival. Daria worked with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times. Her fingers were quick but never rushed, her eyes never leaving Ayana's face for long. Saka returned from outside, shaking snow from his shoulders. His cheeks were raw and white at the edges, early frostnip, but he didn't mention it. He dropped a small bundle by the stove. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were more flat stones, still warm from the neighbor's fire. In this cold, sharing heat was as precious as sharing food. Good, Daria said without looking up. We'll need them soon. The cold is creeping in, and it was, despite the fire. A faint white line of frost began to form along the wall's seams. The air inside was warmer than outside. Yes, but only just. In Yakutia, 7-1C didn't care about walls. It found its way through every crack, every gap, every moment of distraction. Ayana cried out, her voice muffled in the thick air. Her sister knelt beside her, wiping her forehead with a cloth warmed in the water bucket. It's okay, she whispered. You're strong. You've always been strong. The next contraction rolled through like a wave under ice. Daria gave a sharp nod. It's time. The women moved into place. One adjusted the furs. Another held Ayana's hand. Another kept the kettle steaming. Saka stood at the foot of the bed, his hands clenched, useless. In this moment, the men's work was done. Survival now rested in the hands of the women. Outside, the wind began to howl, a low, mournful sound that slipped into the cabin like a ghost. Snowflakes the size of coins danced in the swirling dark, rattling against the shuttered windows. Somewhere in the distance, a sled dog barked once, then fell silent. Inside, Daria's voice cut through the wind. Push, Ayana gritted her teeth, the tendons in her neck tight as rope. She pushed. Time seemed to slow. The sound of the fire a dull roar in her ears. The room shrank to the size of her pain, and the promise beyond it. Then, a sharp cry. Not from Ayana, but from something new. Something small. Something alive. Daria lifted the baby, wrapped quickly in a strip of soft fur. Steam rose from its tiny body in the cold air. The room held its breath. In weather like this, a newborn's first minutes were as dangerous as the birth itself. Hot stones, Daria ordered. They slid the warm rocks under the bedding, building a circle of heat around the mother and child. The baby's skin was flushed, its breath quick and shallow. Daria pressed it against Ayana's chest, covering them both in thick hides, skin to skin. Warmth, the oldest heater in the world. Ayana looked down at the small face, eyes squeezed shut, mouth opening in a wail that cut through the frost. Tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. Saka moved closer, kneeling beside them. He placed his hand over both of theirs. For a moment, the frost outside didn't matter. The wind roared again, shaking the cabin walls. But inside, there was fire. Inside, there was life. Part 3. The night that tried to take them to birth was over, but the real battle had just begun. In Yakutia, the cold didn't celebrate life. It tested it. And the first test for a newborn came in the hours after they drew their first breath. The fire was stoked until the metal stove glowed faintly red. But it still wasn't enough. At -71°C, heat leaked away like water from a cracked barrel. The walls groaned under the cold, and frost crept down from the roof beams like slow-moving white vines. Daria knew the danger. A newborn could lose body heat 20 times faster than an adult. She checked the baby's tiny hands and feet every few minutes, making sure they stayed warm under the hides. Don't let her cry too long, she told Ayana softly. Crying wastes her heat. Saka slipped outside with 2 other men to fetch more firewood. The door opened to a blast of air so sharp it felt like it sliced into the lungs. His eyelashes froze together instantly. The night was a deep, endless black, the kind that swallowed lantern light whole. Every step crunched like breaking glass. The woodpile was buried under a skin of ice. They worked quickly, hacking pieces free, the cold burning their fingertips even through thick fur mittens. Out here, a few minutes without movement could mean frostbite. Back inside, the baby stirred and whimpered. Ayana pressed her closer, wrapping another reindeer hide around them both. Her sister sat beside her, holding a kettle over the fire so the steam drifted over their faces, a trick to keep the air from drying out their throats. The hours passed like a slow siege. The wind outside grew more violent, rattling the shutters hard enough to knock loose a drift of snow that spilled onto the floor. The men returned with wood, shaking the frost from their shoulders. Their faces were pale under the soot-dark light, lips nearly white. Sokka knelt by Ayana. "She's strong," he whispered, looking at the tiny bundle. His voice was low, almost in awe. "She's still breathing steady." But the cold had one more trick. Just before dawn, the wind died, and the temperature dropped even lower. Without the wind to mix the air, the frost settled like lead, even inside. The air near the floor froze solid enough that a bucket of water turned to slush in minutes. Daria ordered the baby lifted higher, into the warmest layer of air near the ceiling. They built a kind of nest on a shelf of furs and hides, placing hot stones in a ring around it, careful to keep them wrapped, to avoid burns. Ayana climbed up to, holding her child close, while the others kept the fire roaring below. Everyone in the cabin knew, if the temperature dropped just a little further, no amount of firewood could hold it back. Survival would depend on bodies pressed close, sharing every scrap of heat. And so, one by one, the others joined them. Sokka lay beside Ayana, his arm around her, and Ayana's sister pressed against her back. Daria sat at their feet, the baby in the safest place in the village, at the center of a circle of living warmth. Outside, the cold was absolute. Inside, there was the faint crackle of fire, the slow breath of the newborn, and the stubborn will of people who had no intention of letting the frost win. When the first faint gray light of morning seeped into the cabin, the temperature began to rise, barely, but enough. The worst was over. But as Daria looked at the sleeping baby, she knew the story of that night would be told for years. In Yakutia, life was always a fight, and this child's first night had been a victory worth remembering. Part 4. The sun that named her dawn in Yakutia didn't burst over the horizon. It crept, slow, pale, reluctant, like it knew better than to rush into a land this cold. Outside the cabin, the air shimmered faintly, as if light itself was struggling to move through it. The cold still clung to everything, but after the night they had endured, even the slightest warmth felt like a blessing. Ayana was awake before the others. She sat quietly, the baby against her chest, listening to the faint crackle of the fire and the rhythmic breathing around her. Every so often, the child made a small sound, not a cry, more like a sigh. Ayana pressed her lips to the baby's forehead and closed her eyes. Sokka stirred, blinking at the pale light. He reached out and touched the baby's head gently. "She made it," he whispered, as if saying it aloud might summon bad luck. But the truth was in front of him. The baby's skin was warm, her tiny fists curling and uncurling with the lazy rhythm of life. Daria busied herself with breakfast, a pot of thick porridge, enriched with the last of the dried berries. "Eat," she commanded, handing bowls around. "You all need strength. The night took more from you than you think." By mid-morning, the word had spread through the village. In Yakutia, births were rare enough to be an event, but a birth on the coldest day anyone could remember was something else entirely. One by one, neighbors arrived, bundled in layers of fur and felt, their breath puffing in the air like smoke. They carried small gifts, a strip of dried fish, a piece of carved bone, a scrap of embroidered cloth. The elders came last, stooped, wrapped in ancient fox fur coats. They stepped inside and stood over the sleeping baby. They didn't smile, not yet. In their eyes, the newborn was still walking the narrow line between life and death, and only time could tip the balance. The oldest woman, Tatiana, leaned close and studied the child. Her voice was rough from years of smoke and frost, born in the breath of the white death. She said, using the village's name for the deadly cold, "She will need a name that carries fire." Naming was no small thing here. A name was a shield, a wish, a map for the life ahead. The villagers gathered around, their fur hoods brushing each other, the room filled with the scent of smoke and reindeer hide. Tatiana dipped her hand into the pot of porridge and smeared a tiny bit on the baby's lips. "Let her taste the food of her people," she murmured. The baby stirred, her mouth opening in reflex. A ripple of murmured approval passed through the crowd. Then, after a long silence, Tatiana spoke the name, Cyana, in their tongue. It meant sun over the snow. It was a name for resilience, for the light that warmed even the coldest day. a name for a child who had entered the world in a place where life clung to the edge, but refused to let go. Outside, the wind had eased. The smoke from the chimney rose straight into the sky. The villagers stepped back into the cold one by one, leaving the small family in the quiet cabin. Ayana lay back, her child nestled beside her, and for the first time since labor began, she let herself rest. Sokka sat by the fire, carving a small, wooden figure, a walrus, the animal whose meat and fat had kept them alive through winters past. It would be the baby's first talisman. The day passed slowly, the pale sun tracing a low arc across the frozen horizon. Each hour felt like a gift, another step away from the night that could have stolen everything. And somewhere deep in the snowbound village, an old woman was already telling the story of the night when the cold tried to take a newborn, and the people of the Lena River fought it back with fire, with furs, and with the unyielding will to see another sunrise. In Yakutia, that was enough.